Welcome to another episode of the podcast Profits Unleashed podcast, where we empower, inspire other coaches to use podcasting as a way to drive leads and sales into their business. And today, after the break, I will be talking about playing the long game when it comes to podcasting. But before that, today's guest is Blair Dunkley. Now, he is a mind model method coach and trainer. And his journey is really unlike any other because his father fell into a 14-year coma after surgery. And he really discovered the limits of mindset training, your normal mindset training. So although he hired a mindset coach and he became a mindset coach himself, he was following all the so-called right steps, the advice that is to just believe more, and it failed him. So he decided to create the mind models, a system designed to work in the toughest moments, whether you have belief or not. So today we're going to be talking about, how your why is actually keeping you stuck. So welcome to the show, Blair.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen.
So first of all, let's go back to that story. What actually inspired you to create this system?
As you said, my dad went in for open heart surgery, and 15 minutes before he was going to be released from the intensive care ward to the general ward, he stopped breathing for some reason. Actually, I was told that the doctors had just finished seeing him and they were at the foot of his bed and he stopped breathing. And they gave him medication to induce a coma because he was fighting intubation, and he never came out of the coma. So that was that. 2 weeks later, my family and I were called in to be told that by the doctors that my father had a 99% chance of never coming out of the coma. So 1% chance of coming out of the coma. He never did. He was in the coma for 14 years. But 2 weeks after that news that night, I went home and I collapsed in the shower in just uncontrollable crying, convulsive crying, and just was slumped down in the corner of the shower, just feeling ripped up, torn apart, like my life had just been crushed. And everything was about to change, and it actually was. So what I wound up doing was pulling a towel down, turning off the water, pulling a towel down, drying myself off, and getting myself 2 weeks later to see my mindset trainer. And when she wound up putting me through the same 90-minute regimen of behaviors, of skills, and everything that I'd put myself through, she looked at me square in the eye and said, "Blair, you just don't believe enough." And I flipped her the bird and told her to F off in the strongest tone you can imagine and left. Because at that moment in time, I was working as a life skills coach and trainer and vice president of life skills colleges. And we had 80% of our student population was potentially suicidal. If I said that to any of my students, I might as well just give them a gun and let them blow their brains out. It's unconscionable what she just did. And I knew at that instant that mindset did not work as promoted, as sold, as I was filled in at. It didn't work. You can't blame a process on people and make it the person's problem when I would have done anything to get my mindset back. I had a company to run. I had 800 students nightly to keep alive with 1,000 students in our branches, in our different locations and campuses throughout the country. Yeah, that was just not okay. So what I wound up doing, I'd already started doing a bit of research follow-up from the work that had been done by the government, where they spent $42 million and 5 years to research the life skills stuff. But I was transitioning because that was still incomplete, that the researchers wanted to do more research, but the government funding ran out. So I had the school with my mother and we ran it and we continued on the research. That research led to mind models. But unlike mindset, we tested every mind model to work 80% of the time the first time. How come? Like, what's the point of doing it at 80%? Why not 100%? Because 100% is impossible. You cannot plan for every contingency. But when you train people in a system in a way that is congruent with how your brain thinks, and it's based on strong scientific evidence because everything was identifiable, repeatable, and duplicatable. And those three conditions, that's basically the scientific method. So when you can make it identifiable, repeatable, and duplicatable 80% of the time after you're taught how to do that effectively, you've got a winning combination. Would you take those odds and go gambling in Monte Carlo or Vegas? 80% of the chance to win? You'd double down. Of course you would. It wouldn't matter. You're going to have a win. The other thing that happened to me is as I was developing this, actually was a few years later, I had a student from the local university who was a postgraduate student who was suicidal. He got referred to us. And at the end of the day, his expertise was in statistics. And he was working, this is like 30, 40 years ago. It was back when they were taking algorithms and making learning algorithms and fractal equations and statistical analysis to break it down. And he was doing work with learning equations. And at the end of the day, he said to me, Blair, you've been out on calls, haven't you? And I said, like suicide runs. And I said, yeah, quite a few. And he said, how many chances does somebody who's going to kill themselves give you, or who's potentially suicidal, give you before they shut you down and nicely shoo you away so they can go take care of business, kill themselves? And I said, you're suicidal. How many chances would you give me? And I'll write down my number, you write down your number, and we'll take it from there. We did that. We both held up our pieces of paper, and it was 3. And he says, wow, you know that thing that you taught me about evaluation? I went, yeah. That's a mind model. Yeah. When you effectively actually evaluate, like in some of my equations, what happens is you can have almost infinite amount of possibilities out there. But if you effectively evaluate each time with just 3 attempts, the probability is that you're close to that, you're at the tipping point 99.99% of the time.
Wow.
If you do that. In other words, it's like these magic numbers, and he shared other numbers, 3, 7, 10, 9 or 10, depending on the thing, but prime numbers. But these are amazing numbers. But if you know how to apply the mind model of effective evaluation on your specific issue, and you evaluate it reasonably and fairly, you'll be next to a breakthrough with only 3 evaluations. That was earth-shattering to me.
Right. So what you're saying here, or what I'm getting from what you're saying here, is with your process that you've created, you can have phenomenal transformations if you go through it 3 times, just 3 times. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
That's a large part of it. The thing here is that most people are looking for solutions and they want an answer. What if You don't go for an answer. Is life not changing so fast that gives you
Mm-hmm.
whiplash? It's just getting faster and faster. And right now, psychology, coaching even, traditional coaching is not keeping up with the pace. It's trying to give people answers. And in a week, that answer can get blown
Could be
up and
different.
it doesn't work
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Hello, what's the problem with this picture? The problem is people are not resourceful. They're seeking solutions, not resourceful states. What happens if your brain gets put into how to figure out the problem state by practicing, evaluating on the problem, and all of a sudden your brain goes, oh, I'm here and I can do it this way and this way. I can figure this stuff out. I've got 3 ways to attempt it. And that's what we do in Mind Model Method Coach training is get people to become resourceful, not give them answers.
Ah, it's
Okay?
about them coming to the conclusion themselves, which is the only
Absolutely.
way. People, if they're just going to try and give them an answer, that there isn't one size fits all. So how your why is actually keeping you stuck? Can you share a little bit about that and then
Absolutely.
how you fix that?
Absolutely. The fix is remarkably easy, but the research okay, life skills figured out this one-page thing called information seeking questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. I
Mhm.
had 2 young lads in my life skills group, both of them 18, one from the best part of town, the other from the wrong side of the tracks.
Mhm.
And I didn't really like the guy that was born with the silver spoon in his mouth that much. He was a nice guy, but very brash. And the other guy would just bust his ass. Now, my whole thing was I'm listening to them, and I had this idea that what if the questions that we ask ourselves are we need to ask better quality questions to be able to leverage ourselves into better quality answers. Reasonable hypothesis, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So what I did is I did 3 months of testing, and fortunately I had them in there for 4 months. But what I noticed was I did all my stats again, crunched all my numbers, put it all together, took it to my math professor, and my math professor said, Blair, you did your stats absolutely perfect, and your result is absolutely correct. These are this answer is completely does not show any statistical validation based on your own research. So your hypothesis of a better question, getting a better answer, does not hold true. I'd seen this before in 2 other research papers, one saying it did, one saying it didn't. And so I did mine trying to figure out, oh, I wanted to go this way of saying it did, but it went the other way and saying it didn't. And I went, ah. And I remember crumpling up my paper, lobbing it at a gorgeous arc through the air into the trash. And in midair, I had this epiphany. What if it's just simpler? What if it's as simple as just the question you ask? Anyway, I thought it would take me no time to figure out these things that eventually got called the question concepts. But it took me, I thought I could do this in 6 months and bang it out and transform people's lives. No, 6.5 years of research and figured out that the who, what, when, where, why, and how are the only 6 questions our brain processes.
Mm.
But who, what, when, where, and how process things differently than the why. The why
Mm.
loads emotion first and takes you back into your amygdala. It also is a true why. And I have things called disguised question concepts because I realized that these things that we're using, like who, what, when, why, and how, these words are not actually the way our brain processes it. It's the name of the process, not the process itself. And how the brain processes it is the thing that makes the difference. So if you're in a why that's actually a what, it works. But if you're in a why that actually is a why, you're going to give out reasons, excuses, rationalizations, and justifications. It's going to be past-based. It's going to be emotionally loaded. And it's only going to be verified by you internally. You ever get into arguments with somebody else and you're why this, why that, and the argument just keeps on blowing up? Okay? True for you?
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. And really interesting, because you're right. It is the emotional, but some would say that's the point, wouldn't they?
Some would say that's the point if they want to hold you stuck in your emotions without balancing it out against information. See, what happens if information and emotion need to be balanced? And in my model method coach training, I teach a thing called the balance formula, which is how to balance these two things out so you don't get overwhelmed by pure logic or pure emotion, that you have a balance between the two. But most of us get trapped in our amygdala, and we can literally brown out our prefrontal cortex, which is our executive center of our brain. And they've got pictures of this actually happening where people have brownouts. The literal area of the brain that gives you your conscious control and executive thinking and decision making and choice, all in the prefrontal cortex. Yet the amygdala, your emotional area, is your lizard brain area of your brain, basically, is all lit up. Okay, it's very whatever, and they're in the middle of an argument, and they can't get into their logic. You actually need an emotion, and out of all of the emotions, thousands of emotions that I tested, only one moves people from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. Only one.
Which is?
Curiosity.
Ah.
If you don't get curious, back here, you have to feel, you feel curiosity. You don't think curiosity, you feel curiosity. Okay? And when you're curious, that starts loading up how your prefrontal cortex actually engages with this.
Wow. So would that make sense then to ask when you're talking about you've got to ask yourself important questions?
Exactly.
So could it be more like, what if? Is that a curious question?
How about what might?
See,
what if is probably going to trigger you back into that. What if can be what's referred to as a disguised question concept. And it can disguise a why really easily. But what
might happen if?
No, what might you do? What might I do? See, it's the what and the if. Your brain will probably go to the past to try and find something to assimilate the
if. Okay, yes, I get that.
So I'm trying to get you, okay, think of it this way. You want to be forward facing in the present, going to the future. But why takes you back to the past?
Yes.
So it's always over your shoulder. You're looking back there. And where do we get our data from? Our past. But are we collecting it to adjust ourselves now if we're in the middle of an argument? No, we're building all of our defenses and more stuff. So-and-so attacked me. They said this, they did that. Everything's happening. I know where you're going to go. I know what you're going to say next. And you say it all like you think all of this stuff, and all of a sudden, if somebody says, so what might you do differently now or right now? And what if you just asked yourself that question? What might I do differently right now? Differently flushes all of that past brings you into the present. All of a sudden, you've got to deal with it now, right now, in the present. And your brain goes, oh, prefrontal cortex, engage. You've got that. And you start thinking.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Isn't it interesting? Just by the words that we choose can trigger completely different things. So I like that. So that makes a lot of sense now, how your why is actually keeping you stuck. Love it.
That's right. But to break free, it's that simple thing, but it's a little, just one more piece. If you think about that why being stuck, does that hold you in a loop? And see, the thing here is, remember when I was saying all the past stuff and you project it into the future? Well, you get what I call a past future loop. And people who are depressed go from their past into their future, and they call that smushing of the past and future together their now. But when you try and tease it apart, they're just hanging on for dear life because they know that their past will happen in the future, and that's now. That's happening to me right now. That's right. But they're not living in the now. They're living in a past future. Psychology's never figured this out. Okay, that's brand new. The other thing here is that you inferred in what you were saying earlier is the meanings of words, pretty important. I've identified that we basically behave to the meanings of our words. How we mean these words, that's the behavior we'll likely do. Okay? It's a big deal.
Yeah.
When you start figuring that stuff out, if you want to change your financial, like so many people are stuck in finance issues, money issues, and people with imposter syndrome. They're stuck there. They've got a great business idea with full-on imposter syndrome, and they can't break free. Well, that's what I do. And taking a young man, Earl Flamata, a good friend, I see him still every morning. He's got a little group together that I go on. And so I join him daily on that. And at the end of the day, he went from $75,000 a year in just over a year to $1.2 million. The following year, he brought me in and I trained up his team, and they did 28 million.
Wow.
That's by changing how you think.
Love that. It just so mindset really is the thing, but maybe we've been getting it slightly wrong. Slightly wrong.
We don't. We had something. If you go Google this and figure out where mindset was originally created and when it was created, it's over 100 years old. It's an antique. And it was actually established out of England, believe it or not, during the Industrial Revolution. How come? Because they had to take people from an agrarian, from the farm, into factories. And they had to find people that could be promoted up in the factories into management. Mindset. You've got to shift it from being whatever. And clarity versus certainty, another mind model. Back in the day, really, certainty was a big deal because in those factories, you had a big sprocket, a gear wheel with the cogs on it. A cog breaks off, and guess what? For an absolute fact, certainty, that's broken. I happen to be holding an iPhone here. My iPhone has 8 billion transistors in it. One of them goes, and I need a scanning electron microscope to find it. But I don't have time to find which one it is and replace it. So I have to use a completely different process. And that's the difference in life between knowing that this cog is broken off to a little itty bitty transistor. I need a different way of thinking because it's a completely different problem. Einstein said it. You cannot solve the problem with the same thinking that created it. You cannot solve it. You have to change how you think to solve the problem. Guess what? Back in the day, certainty worked. Today, it's clarity. You got to be clear.
Mm.
And you've got to figure out a
Wow.
way to get clear.
Love this. Absolutely love this. Really fascinating. Look, if there are people out there that are feeling stuck right now, what should the listeners do next?
Really, there's two things, and they're both free. You can come and join me on a free 5-day business challenge. And so if you're business oriented or just want to get clear on that yourself, gain the clarity and figure out more what this stuff is about, you can really join me on the 5-day business challenge. And I just gave you a link so you can give that to your listeners. There's another free thing that, well, actually, I'm going to give you two more free things.
Well, for the listeners, if they can't, because yes, your links will be in the show notes, but if they're driving the car right now and they're interested, they want to go and do the 5-day challenge, where do they find it?
You'll need to go to rewiringthemind.com/challenge-sign up.
Perfect.
Okay.
Wonderful.
And again, here's going to be the seconds here. There we go. And here is the free gift that I give out. And it's called the 3 E's. And it's some of the most simple yet powerful mind models. And it starts with effective versus ineffective, external versus internal, and evaluation versus judgment. And yes, it's the evaluation versus judgment one that I told in that earlier story. But you can go to go.mindmodelmentor.com/3E-gift.
Wonderful. And that might be a lot to remember if you're driving along. So please make sure you resort back to the show notes to get the link for that. We'll have that all in there. I could talk to you all day, Blair. Absolutely fascinating stuff. And I get it. I totally get it. It makes a lot of sense as to some of the stuff that we've been taught maybe worked for then, but these things have moved on. And now to figure out that you want that balance between the emotional stuff and the logical, analytical mind. You need it to come together because I suppose we're all taught that you got your conscious, you got your unconscious, and it's the unconscious mind that's running things. And so we need to think, obviously we need to think to do stuff, but quite often we will overthink. And sometimes we need to, I say I'm practicing my unthinking. Because quite often that's when the answers come to you. And so I totally understand that, having all this in balance. And so you might be stuck, listeners, not through something that you're doing wrong, but you just haven't learned something new, which is what Blair's going to share. So Blair, thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing. Loved it. And I will be back after the break, guys, with a little short training as to why playing the long game, if you're in business, is so important, especially when it's relating to podcasting. So thanks for your time, and bye for now. So welcome back. And so today I just wanted to have a quick chat about something that's super important if you're looking to use podcasting to really grow your business. We're talking about playing the long game. Look, I know everyone loves those instant results, right? The quick wins, the immediate gratification. It feels great, but let's be real. Podcasting isn't a place for instant success. If you're in it for the long haul and want to see some serious growth, you've got to think of podcasting as a long-term strategy, not something that's going to blow up overnight. Let me break it down why this long game approach is so important. Number one, building a sustainable audience. First things first, podcasting is all about building an audience over time. Look, sure, maybe you'll get a nice bump in listeners after your first few episodes, but the real magic happens when you show up consistently. Podcasting isn't a sprint, it's more like a marathon. You can't expect to launch a few episodes and have thousands of listeners tuning in right away. People need to get to know you, trust you, and understand what you're all about. And trust. That doesn't happen in 1 or 2 episodes. So if you're thinking, why isn't this working yet? It's because real growth takes time. But if you're showing up and providing value every single week, you'll start building that trust. And that's when the real impact kicks in. Now, number 2, relationships over quick sales. Look, this is another thing you have to keep in mind. Podcasting isn't about the hard sell. I know it's easy to think that your podcast is the perfect place to pitch your services in every single episode, but that's actually a turnoff for most listeners. Now, what you really want to focus on is building relationships. When you show up as a real person or as your authentic self, sharing your stories, giving value and offering insights, your audience will start to trust you. And trust me, people buy from people they trust. That is it. So instead of thinking about a quick sale or using it purely to generate leads, think about nurturing those relationships over time. That's how you'll eventually move listeners closer to being loyal customers or referral partners and raving fans. Now, number 3, consistency creates compounding growth. The beauty of podcasting is in its consistency. It's not about doing one viral episode and hoping for the best. No, it's about showing up every week, building your library of content and getting the compounding effect to do its thing. Look, I've been going more than 4 years. I made a commitment to just show up every single week. Back in the beginning of 23, I even went to 3 episodes a week until I almost hit burnout, I'll admit, and then went down to 2, and I'm back to 1 episode a week. So it didn't happen overnight. Yes, we've hit 650,000 downloads, but trust me, the majority of that has happened in the last 2 years. The first 2 years were very slow. So imagine you're planting seeds. The first few episodes might feel like they're not getting any traction. That's definitely how I felt. But as you keep going, those seeds start to sprout. And after a while, you've got a whole garden of loyal listeners who are ready to engage with you. So each episode you release adds to your body work. Once you increase your content library and then you increase the listeners over time, you will be discovered. The more content that you have, the more people can find you. But that's not going to happen unless you stick with it long enough to see that growth. And what is so sad is that I see so many people give up too soon. So patience is key when facing setbacks. Let's be real. There will be days when it feels like nothing's happening. Maybe your download numbers aren't where you want them to be. I saw mine go down for a while, but yeah, it doesn't matter. It will go like that, up and down. Just keep showing up for those who are tuning in. Look, every podcaster, even the super successful ones, have faced setbacks, whether they had a slow start, technical issues, or feeling like no one is listening. But the difference between those who quit and those who keep going is patience. You have to trust the process and know that the results will come with time. So if you stay consistent and push through those tough moments, that's when you'll see the payoff. It's not about the instant results. It's all about showing up, doing the work, and knowing that over time, things will grow. And finally, integrating podcasting into your bigger strategy. It's all part of the ecosystem, right? It's just one part of your whole business strategy. It's not a standalone miracle worker. If you treat it as part of a bigger plan, one that includes your other marketing efforts like social media, email lists, and your sales funnels, podcasting just amplifies everything else that you're doing. But again, don't expect a quick turnaround. Podcasting is like adding fuel to the fire. The fire takes time to get going, but once it does, it's going to blaze. And podcasting can help you build your brand, position yourself as an authority, and connect with your audience in a way that no other platform can. But to get there, you need to think long term. You need to play the long game. So here's the bottom line. If you want to make podcasting work for your business, you've got to play the long game. So, guys, if you're thinking about it and don't know where to start, if you've been thinking about it for a while, but you get overwhelmed with all the moving pieces, because it is a big commitment. But this is why we're here. We can handle pretty much everything other than being you. So if you feel that you don't have time to launch a podcast because you don't have time for the post-production and the whole strategy side of it, reach out, book a call. podcastprofitsunleashed.com/appointment. Just come and have a complimentary podcast strategy call. And we can get you up and running in no time. I'll be back next week. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to today's episode on the Podcast Profits Unleashed podcast. If you're a coach, consultant, therapist, or healer who would like to drive sales whilst having fun podcasting, head over to podcastprofitsunleashed.com/free and find out how you can turn your podcast into a sales machine. We'll see you on the next episode.